welcome. I'm Laura Poland with Dietitian in Your Kitchen, and today I'm going to show you a very easy recipe, a very versatile recipe. It's a roast chicken with spring vegetables. So this recipe starts by preheating your oven to 500 degrees, and so I've got that started, and then I got my baking pan out. You want a baking pan that has a little bit of a lip to it. And so if you don't have a nice stone like this, I like the stone, but this pan would work super well too. But you would want to take this off and just use the bottom half of this pan. And this would be a great pan to use as well. So first ingredient here is chicken breasts. Well, this recipe calls for chicken quarters, skin on, bone in. And I have chosen to, well, I went to the grocery store and they didn't have chicken quarters, so I'm using a chicken breast. Typically, I find this in my grocery store a lot more often than the chicken quarters, and that's cool because my family really doesn't like chicken quarters. This recipe originally called for you to wash and pat dry your chicken. As a food safety expert, I would recommend, oh, that's my oven preheated, ready to go. Never, never, never wash your chicken and pat it dry. Simply take it out of the package and use it. If you want to remove some of the skin, you can do that. But generally speaking, you are just inviting more bacteria into your home by washing it in the sink. It was going to spray water and that type of thing. You do not need to wash chicken. So I'm just going to place these knowing that I am going to want to put some vegetables around them. These are huge chicken breasts, aren't they? So actually this recipe calls for 3.5 pounds, which this is probably 3.5 pounds. And so I would probably freeze this other chicken breast for another meal, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that off to the side. Now, so each chicken breast is going to serve at least 2 people. Now that my hands are contaminated, what I want to do is I want to season the chicken, and then I'm just going to put it in the oven because my oven is not right on temperature. So hold on while I go wash my hands. Now that my hands are washed, I'm going to grab the salt and pepper, and you can see I've already got my lemon here. And the next step is just to salt and pepper the chicken. So I'm just going to generously salt it. If you need to cut back on salt, you could do so. You don't really have to use salt. You could use a Mrs. Dash, but I like just a little bit of salt and pepper. Okay, it calls for you to squeeze now half of your lemon onto the chicken. In order to get a lemon nice and juicy, you want to roll your chicken, or roll your lemon. And so I'm just going to roll it like this. And I can feel it starting to get a little squishy. That's perfect. That's going to release the juices a whole lot easier. So I'm just going to cut it in half. This doesn't look too seedy. But if seeds do squeeze out onto your chicken, it's not the end of the world. It's easy to pick them off later when you're cooking or whatever. So, oh, this is a nice juicy lemon. So, squeeze this. It's just so fresh, the lemon. And now I'm going to grab my olive oil. And it talks about drizzling over a tablespoon of olive oil. I generally don't measure that because I have to wash another dish, right? So I'll just drizzle a little bit of olive oil. And oops, a lot over there. That's good enough. And literally you're just going to put it into the oven for about 15 minutes. So go. Start my timer. The temperature on this oven is 500 degrees. So that's a really high temperature. So That's going to cook super fast. And the cool thing about this recipe is from here, you can just start getting the other ingredients ready to put on the pan while you're doing that. This recipe calls for fingerling potatoes. They don't always have them in the store. If they do, great, but they are more expensive. There is nothing wrong with using a regular potato as well. So just a regular russet Idaho potato. If you're making this recipe, we know we're going to have 4 servings. You might throw 3 potatoes in for 4 people, or 4 potatoes, however your family likes it. So I'm just going to use the fingerling potatoes to save myself a little bit of time while I'm talking to you. And what I'm going to do is I'm always going to rinse my vegetables before using them. So rinsed potatoes, we're going to put them in our bowl. And this recipe also calls for, let's see. Oh, I'm supposed to cut the potatoes in half. So I always leave, if I'm using a regular potato or fingerling, I would always leave the skin on. There's more fiber than in the potatoes, and there are some nutrients that can be found in the skin that you know take off when you peel it. So let me just cut these in half. All right. Next it says to cut the radishes. So let's get our radishes. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. If you're not a huge radish fan, you can completely not put radishes in. If you like mushrooms, you could put mushrooms in instead of radishes. There's a variety. That's what I love about this recipe. It is completely versatile. So I'm using radishes. I actually really like them. They're actually kind of fun when you roast them. So maybe try it once, and you might be surprised at the flavor that it brings to this dish is kind of fun. This recipe tells you to cut these in half. Again, you're just trying to get your vegetables to be about the same, you know, width or size so that they all cook at the same time. Okay, so next I'm going to add the carrots, and it just says to add a bunch of baby carrots. You can see we've got a lot of vegetables going, so I usually add enough carrots for 4 servings. Figuring that you also have the potatoes and everything else, that's probably plenty of carrots. All right, so yeah, I think the last recipe ingredient here is scallions. So let's talk scallions. These are scallions. These are also called green onions. They have a lot of names that you might see them at the store. So it can be very confusing, because if you looked for scallions at my grocery store, you would not find them. You would only find green onions, because that's what they call them. So just want to let you know, in a recipe, it might call for different things. Now, again, this is something that if you don't like, you don't have to. It's a very mild flavor. You can use onion, but you could also use scallion, or shallots are another option. So anything in the garlic family or onion family would work for this recipe. So I'm going to wash my scallions and use that since I have it. And these are the easiest thing to add to your recipe. So if you cut off the head, a lot of times there's like a little loose skin, and I just kind of remove that as well, because sometimes that has a little dirt up in it and that type of thing. And this just tells us we're going to cut it into thirds. So we're actually going to leave them nice and big and whole. And the thing I like about this, instead of using the oven or the onion, is that it adds a lot of green to your dish now too. So isn't that pretty? All right, so next it tells you to just kind of toss your vegetables. I'm going to mix them a little bit. And then you are going to put on 2 tablespoons of olive oil into this bowl and season it with salt and pepper. And that's about 2. If you get excess olive oil, you can actually just leave it behind in the bowl, which is kind of cool and easy to do. So I don't worry about, again, measuring my olive oil there. All right, before I mix too much, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of salt and pepper. Again, just to your taste. Do it like I do popcorn, just a little once around, and then mix it in really good. All right, that's our chicken after 20 minutes. We'll turn our timer off and we'll just start putting the vegetables around. Okay, so now that we have the vegetables around, and it's okay if it's up and over it a little bit, so now we're just going to put it back in the oven for 20 minutes. Now I use this time to clean up my kitchen a little bit and get ready for the end. The great thing about this meal is it's all on one pan and it's dinner. So the chicken is a protein source, you've got vegetables, you've got potatoes for a carb source. And so think about that when you're preparing and deciding which vegetables to include in the roast. So you do want it to be a balanced dinner. A lot of times if I'm making this for a group of people, then I might throw in a dessert, which is like a fruit dessert or something like that. All right, so I've got my kitchen all cleaned and thought we'd have some time to chat here. So I like to always think ahead. For me, in my house, there's only 2 of us. So this pan of chicken, if I do make the full recipe and it serves 4 people, it's going to be way more than we need at one meal. Sometimes I like it so much I will do leftovers out of it, but I know there's a lot of you out there who just don't like leftovers. So I like to kind of work on decreasing food waste and getting creative with those leftovers. So one of the things you could do with this leftover chicken is make it into a soup. There's an easy chicken soup recipe that you can make with anytime you have leftover chicken. Also, a leftover chicken chili is a possibility as well. And then finally, even just making it into a chicken quesadilla. You can take any of the vegetables that are left over, really, if you wanted, and the chicken, add some taco seasoning, reheat it in a pan. If you don't have the vegetables left over, you could always just add some onions and peppers, tomatoes, whatever you like to throw into your quesadillas. And of course, you'll need some cheese for the quesadilla. And then finally, I like to top quesadillas with a little bit of sour cream and then salsa, and then I like to throw a lot of shredded lettuce or something like that on top, or shredded spinach on top to make it into a complete meal with your quesadilla. If you're a vegetarian, there are some ways to still utilize these roast vegetables and make a complete meal out of it. You could also, making this, just add garbanzo beans to your vegetables. You could also try tofurkey or a tofu scramble. You could make that on the side, roast your vegetables, and then have your protein source with your vegetables. Or even a fried egg with the roasted vegetables. So one of the things that we're going to do when our chicken is done here in a few more minutes is we are going to add our dill. And so understand, if you can't find a fresh herb that you like in the grocery store to add to this, you could always just use a dried dill weed. So if you have a recipe that calls for, like this would call for 1/4 of a cup of fresh dill, I wouldn't add 1/4 of a cup of dried dill. Just sprinkling it across it and to your taste is all you need. And if you don't like herbs, you don't have to add it. Just the olive oil, salt, and pepper with roast vegetables is delicious. Another thing to consider is if you have vegetables that are about to go bad, this is a great recipe to do. So keeping some frozen chicken in your, some chicken in your freezer that you can thaw out and use in this recipe at any time will really help reduce food waste. Isn't that beautiful? All right, so here's where if you have a thermometer, it is best to check your chicken and make sure that it's done at this point. Pull out my instant read thermometer and make sure that another indicator is that your juices are coming out clear. It does appear that they are. So that's good. So you want your temperature to be on the chicken of 165 and leave it in for a few minutes, but I can tell my temperature log is done moving up, so I am going to consider this needs a few more minutes. So I'm going to put it back in for about 5 minutes. Okay, our chicken is ready. So now the recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of dill, and I guess I could have had this chopped up before. I just roughly chopped my fresh dill. If you wanted, again, to use dry dill, you could. So basically, once you're done, what you do is also squeeze lemon, some fresh lemon again, and this time you can squeeze it over the vegetables too if you like. Gives it a nice fresh flavor. Then you are just going to take the freshly cut dill, put it over the chicken and the vegetables, just like that. Isn't it beautiful? And it's so easy to do. And I have to tell you, it smells delicious. So I really hope you enjoy this recipe and see how easy it is to do. And it's something that's very, very versatile. Yes, I use a recipe and I followed it, but you don't have to. Once you get that idea down of roasting your chicken with these vegetables and see how it goes, you can play around with the recipe quite a bit. And so I hope you enjoy this roast chicken with spring vegetables.